Today we will be talking about racism in international schools, and we will be interviewing Amahle from South Africa. She used to go to several international schools before joining university or attending university, so that's talking about.
Yes, so hi, my name is Amahle Sangqu. I'm a South African student. I think most people on this lab know. I've been to international schools for almost my entire life, besides 3 years where I went to a South African school. But yeah, I, as a person of color and African to be specific, I've experienced and witnessed a lot of racism within international schools, and I just wanted to let people know about it.
Perfect. All right, so can you just give us like a brief rundown of where you've been before and like how many international schools you went to and like what their, population looked like, or the student body just looked like?
Okay, so for the first few years of my life, I was in South Africa until I was 3 years old, and I moved to Ethiopia for not sure how long, we'll say a year. And I went to the international school there. I think it's ICE. And within there, I don't really remember much about the population, so I can't really talk much about it. But it mainly included a lot of African children because of the AU being stationed in Addis. And then I went to a school in Toulouse in France. Can't remember how long I stayed in that school for, but that school was primarily French students, so there I had to acquire the French language and forgot it very shortly after. And then I moved to South Africa and then to New York, where I went to the international school. There I stayed for around 7 years, and the student body population was pretty international. However, because of the acceptance rates or acceptance policy, it did also include a lot of very wealthy American students that attended the school, and most of them were white. And then after that, I came to school in South Africa, where I went to a private South African school, and the population there was very, very, very white, which was a bit alarming. Well, not alarming for me, but different for me, because South Africa is majority black, has a majority black population, so being in a school that didn't reflect that was a bit of a shift. And then I went to school in Brussels, Belgium, where the population of it is primarily white European upper class or upper middle class people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect. So, you've ranted a lot of like in your private account and everywhere else about your experiences of being, one of the only people of color in these schools. So could you maybe detail out what specific traumatic or memorable experiences you had in some of these schools?
Definitely. I think throughout my life or being within international schools, I've always been one of the only people of color. And at first it didn't really stand out or matter within like the junior school phases, because especially in international schools, I don't want to say indoctrinate, but really drill in the concept of there's one race, the human race, like everyone's the same, like preaching this very like everyone's the same rather than here are differences and what makes us different. So we very much have like this homogenized idea of, okay, cool, we're all the same, everything's fine, like everything's cool, until around, I want to say, middle school, where people are starting to realize and become more like aware of social issues, that we realize that we are different, and because no one's ever taught us how to deal with those differences, it comes out in very weird ways. Yeah. So a few traumatic experiences I've had, particularly in high school. In my senior year, there was this student who was, to me, a terrorist, just in the way in which he would go about starting topics and conversations. It was very heavily charged with not necessarily hate, but like there was just something off about the entire experience. And when we go to teachers or like people in charge and be like, sorry, like I had this conversation, it was very uncomfortable. He was displaying like really weird or off views, they'd be like, oh no, that's just how he is, like he's just controversial to be controversial, rather than like addressing the issue of like the things that he would say, because he'd say things like, if you could eliminate one race right now, which would it be? Just at the lunch table. And we just have to like experience those conversations. Or he's mentioned to an African student that was in his higher physics or higher chem class that statistically speaking, she's the least educated person in the room because she's an African woman. And we just have to be like, that's just how he is. Like, we're just okay with letting him say these things without any repercussions. And so I have a bunch more experiences like that, but that one speaks out particularly.
Yeah, no, that must have been really rough, especially like if you go to an international school, a lot of places have their motto as inclusivity and diversity and everything. But like you talked earlier about how the proportion, the racial proportions weren't as diverse as they'd like to claim it. Maybe do you want to comment a little bit about not just the student population, but also like the teacher, faculty populations as well?
I think with international schools, the idea of diversity and inclusivity, specifically the ones that I attended, which are the only ones I can speak to, but they're categorized as private institutions, and like they cost a lot of money to attend. So already the idea of like we're all able to do something is cut short because only a certain select population of people can go there due to access. So schools like particularly had a very, very small African population, a very small Asian population, a very small populations of anything other than European, and different shades of European, different variants, but European in like their population, which made it kind of difficult to like relate to different people. But as well as the staff, there was a very, very small non-white population of teachers at the school. Like I can remember during all of high school, so from grade 10 to grade 12, I only had one black teacher. And even then I only had him for 1 year, but in the entire grounds, him and I at any given point could be the only two black people on the floor. And it would be like funny for me to think, but also like really kind of scary.
Yeah, no, I bet. Could you elaborate a little bit more about how you attempted to seek for assistance from different faculty members, but they just basically shut you away and they were like, oh, that's just the way he acts. Like, why do you think that happens? Like, you're obviously asking for help. Why do you think they just shut you off so easily?
I think it all starts with the way in which they teach you how to interact with others. As a person who grew up in like the international school at a very, very young age, they taught us like peace resolution or problem solving, and in which we had to talk it out, and they would always come to a fair understanding, and there would never be this idea of this person is in the right and this person is in the wrong. It always had to be like a, okay, we're compromising type of problem solution. And so when you're teaching kids to do that from like the first grade, by the time they get to high school and have actual problems where like these situations would happen, or like someone would make a rape joke, we always have to come to this joint conclusion. And so when I would ask for help, they'd be like, okay, cool, like we'll talk to him, we'll see what happens. And then that just ends up translating to no repercussions besides like a talking to maybe, or an email sent to the parents. And so it became very traumatic for students who would seek help, because we'd be like, he did something wrong to me, or this thing was wrong, someone do something about it. And then it just goes like unaddressed or swept under the carpet. So that was really frustrating.
Yeah, I think it's really disappointing to think that, you know, these people that are literally saying, oh yeah, we're gonna, you know, put more money into inclusivity, diversity and stuff, and they literally don't do anything. So yeah, that must have been really painful. Along with that, I think when we talked earlier, you talked a little bit about how people treat the staff that might not be employed directly by the school, but those, you know, cleaning people, janitors, a lot of times. Do you want to comment a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think I've always had this I don't know like how to explain it, but this thing about respect. And what I've realized or noticed that the paid faculty and staff, which happens to be particularly white people, just like in general, get respected way more than the employed staff, like the cleaning staff or the people in the kitchen, who are primarily people of color. And I've always noticed that it's a bit weird how the two different people get like treated completely differently. And it's even worse within South African schools, specifically private South African schools, where the ground staff would have to sit somewhere different for assemblies, like in a completely separate areas, even though it was like a whole school assembly. Or children of the ground staff get treated very differently than normal students who pay. So like just people who aren't the employed staff of the school get treated very differently, specifically ones who are people of color, which I've noticed has been a bit weird all my life.
Yeah. And I think I also saw in one of your like private grants, you talked a little bit about the lack of like diversity within the languages that are offered in a lot of South African systems. Do you want to comment a little bit about that? And yeah.
So basically, when I came back to South Africa in grade 6, I was already too far into the schooling system to have to relearn Afrikaans, which happened to be the only additional language that they had available at the school. And so we were trying to figure out, like, okay, what other options? Because if I started learning this whole new language now and it counted for such a big proportion of my grades, I was going to fail. I was never going to like be able to progress. I would have been at a disadvantage from beginning. So in trying to figure out what to do, the teachers had offered me to like matriculate in my mother tongue, which is Xhosa, but there wasn't any Xhosa teachers at the school, or they couldn't be accredited. So eventually I had to learn Afrikaans. But in going through that experience, I realized that why don't we have a Xhosa teacher or a Pedi teacher or a Tswana teacher like in the school? And so when we went to the teachers to talk about it, they were like, oh no, we can't find qualified teachers to teach. And then you like sit down and do the maths, right?
Yeah.
You realize that how is it possible that in this whole 56 million people in this country, you can't find someone who's qualified to teach Tswana in Pretoria? That's crazy and a lie. So in going through these experiences, you realize that like that's not right. Like, why would they do that? And you realize like if they had those languages, then more Black children would want to go to the school and then would ruin their school's reputation. They did the same thing with us wanting to play soccer in the school. We wanted soccer in high school. The boys begged, they begged for years, and they tried to tell us that like they can't find schools that can play with us that would be in the same league in, which was a lie. They tried to tell us that they didn't want to take the school in that direction. Which basically just meant they didn't want more Black children to come to the school if they offered soccer.
Wow. Coming from like a country that has like a majority Black population, that's crazy.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic.
Yes. You also earlier said that when you look back at stuff, like you begin to realize a lot about your childhood, or like when you were much younger, and how, you know, racism was prevalent from before. Do you want to comment about how your earlier years, not even in high school, how they, like now when you look back at it, you know, it was so prevalent from then?
Yeah, I think, and I've like mentioned this as like a running joke within just my friends, is that like it's a trauma response to like not realizing that like something's bad happening to you in the moment, and then only later realizing, wait, like that was crazy. Why did no one address this at the time? And I think it's also like the lack of knowledge of like, I didn't know it was wrong until I like grew up and understood like right from wrong. So like things like kids touching my hair, that was a really big thing from all of my life. Like they just wanted to touch it, put things in it. Like it was always different, and it was always different from all of my friends. None of my friends had the same type of hair as me ever in my life. And so they'd always want to like play with it, stick their hands in it, and like teachers and like everyone would just let it happen. And I didn't realize that it was a microaggression until I learned what a microaggression was. And I was like, wait a minute, that was that. And so it's just realizing things later, and then knowing how to like figuring out what to do to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. The your comment about how you literally realized microaggressions after you had been a victim to the microaggression. That's really
Yeah.
interesting and honestly kind of comical because I feel like in a sense you kind of get normalized to this whole idea. Like you get
Oh,
normalized
definitely.
to it. Yeah. So do
No,
you want to,
definitely.
yeah. Do you want to go ahead and comment?
Um, yeah, no, I think it's more normalized because again, when things like this happen to other people, because nothing happened to the people before, nothing's going to happen to the people afterwards, and it just continues in that cycle. Because had I had known what microaggressions are, had someone older than me had mentioned like, oh, like these are microaggressions, teach the kids about it because they might not know that this is happening to them. And then by the time like I'm 5 years old, I'm learning, hey, this is bad, then I can do something about it, or like I can take the actions to correct the problem. But because nothing's happened before and no one's done anything prior, we just don't know about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So by the way, to like all our viewers, you can always ask questions, and I see one question popping up. Okay, so what can society do to bring about awareness of racial injustice in private schools in South Africa?
Um, Oh, that is a question for someone with a degree. But I think what society can do is, besides having these conversations, because conversations are good, but conversations are useless without action. And so, and after, like in us having these conversations, like things actually need to happen in terms of putting policies in place to regulate racist, like things of racist nature in private schools in South Africa. So like in us talking about like, okay, cool, the hair rules are kind of messed up, change them if you realize that. But talking about how the hair rules are messed up and that they're rooted in racism and all these different conversations that we are supposed to have, if we don't do anything about it, then it's just going to constantly be a thing that we're fighting for years and years and years and years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how would you like apply the same thing to international schools?
I think definitely with international schools, similarly, when I think what needs to happen within there is when like when people come forward to tell about like things that are happening, I think more needs to be done to hear the people and understand what's happening rather than trying to reach this common decision, because I think that that form of problem solving, if it even would apply under problem solving, has like hurt quite a few people. So I think like just sacking that whole concept and idea and actually getting to addressing the things that have happened so that other things of that nature don't happen later.
Yeah, yeah. No, I definitely agree. Also, just one person commented, you know how we like talked a little earlier about microaggressions. Could you like explain
Yeah.
what microaggressions are?
Okay, so basically a microaggression is something that is done subconsciously to someone else, or like in that nature, so done to or said to someone else that they don't realize is actually racially charged or racially insensitive, or regardless, like, but it's just charged and insensitive and rooted in hate. So something like touching a black woman's hair when they repeatedly ask you not to, or just in like in the first place, is weird because why are you touching someone else? And then it's also in the fact that you deem this as being something foreign and other, and you feel that you are entitled to just like figure out what it is, not, without taking into account that this is another person who you are now, like whose space you're violating for no other reason but for your own like pleasure, which is like weird.
It is weird. Yeah. Just, you know, randomly coming up to like a white person and asking, "Hey, can I touch your hair?" Like that's weird.
Or
Just
like
like
asking them,
anybody does
it's
so.
it's and the thing is, like, you think it's kind of hilarious how these happen, because you'll have instances of people asking if my skin is like that, or if I didn't bath, like if I was just dirty, or like touching my hair, putting things in it. I remember one time in high school, I remember it was actually like vivid in my mind. I had come to school with my afro for the first time, and people were just like touching it, and I was like, why? What? Didn't people tell you not to touch other people? And so like I made a like Instagram post about it, as I usually do, and I was just ranting, and I was like, don't touch my hair, that's weird, like don't do that. And then kids made it a game the next day to touch my hair, like that was the new thing they
Oh.
were going to do today. So they would like during English, like they try to touch my hair. During math, they try to touch my hair. Like they just be like, "Oh, it's so fluffy, it's like a cloud." And because I'm 5'0" and I'm around Nordic giants, they're all taller than me. So I'm like trying to swat them off. But it was just like really humiliating and embarrassing because I'm like, you're treating me like I'm a zoo, like I'm just like a toy to play with when like you're invading my personal space, making me feel very uncomfortable. And it was just, yeah.
Wow. The fact that it wasn't just one person, but like a lot of people is really
Yeah.
confusing. Yeah, so I also
And they were like old too. They were like 17 years old.
Yeah.
It was like
So
they're adults.
Yeah, so they should have known like that it's
Yeah.
not okay. Yeah. How did your like the people close to you, not like that faculty or the administration of the school, how did the people close to you react to your experience?
Usually what would happen is that the people close to me are like students around me, like they would be like, "Oh, like how are you?" Like they try to ask about like how I'm feeling or like try to get the tea on the situation, about like what happened afterwards, and then they'd be like, "Oh no, that was really bad." At least the people who I hung out around were like, "No, that's really bad. Like let's go to the teachers, do something about it." And then when we do something about it, like nothing happens and we're back to square one. But then other students, when they find out about the situation, kind of took it as like I was overreacting for my own like because I was just being dramatic and I was just like angry for being angry's sake or whatever the case may be, and they were like, "No, it was just banter, whatever," and then it kind of just made me feel less inclined to want to do anything because then I'd already be further ostracized from this community that I was already ostracized from. I think they're asking how the school responded. They didn't do anything. They never did anything. Anytime I addressed an issue, bar this one time where I like took all the steps necessary to get something to happen with the student that I was having like a bit of an issue with, and he ended up getting suspended for a few days, but not without like an extensive like not necessarily counseling session, but like when they asked me like what happened, and I was like, well, if I date back to 6 months ago when I aired my first complaint, this is what happened, and I showed them like everything that had happened to that point, and there was like kind of this shock amongst like the teachers that I was talking to at that point, because they were like, how did this go on for this long? And I was like, I've been trying to tell y'all, like I've been at this door many times. Yeah. And you guys thought I was just being dramatic and funny, but like this is what's been happening. And then when that happened, the student population kind of just like were on his side, even though like they knew all the details and all the like, and knew that objectively what he had done and what he had said was wrong. They were like, "Oh no, but it was like jokes and banter or whatever." So it kind of was just like sick.
It's basically like the school completely disregarding your like feelings as well as like the respect that people just generally have for you.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, entirely.
Yeah, that's honestly shocking. Okay, wait. I tried to read this one. Okay, what would be your biggest recommendation for white international school teachers like me to create anti-race, a racist international school environment? I'm gonna guess.
I think one thing for teachers is, I know like if you're a teacher that people are very comfortable with, if they come to you with a problem or an issue that's like specifically racially charged, or just in any case, like do everything in your power to see something happen with it. Because I know that like I've spoken to teachers and they've been like really, what's the word, caring at the time, like sympathetic is the word, sorry. They've been really sympathetic, but then when I thought something was going to come of it, like nothing ever did. And then I kind of was just like, okay, cool, never coming to you, let me find another like strategy. So I think definitely trying to do everything in your power to let something happen, make sure something happens to a problem that has been put forward to you is definitely what I would say.
Yeah. We have another question. Okay, wait, what? Okay. Anyways, outside of that, I think another question is, once again, going back to this idea of international schools and their motto of inclusivity and diversity. And I think you like partially talked about how schools should move forward, but also like students, like we are basically the main problem, you know, us as students are the ones, like teachers can do something to an extent, but also outside of that, what should students do to educate themselves about, you know, these issues?
I think one thing is that, like, one thing that I like to remind people is that Google is free, and it has information that, like, for anything you need to know. So if you want to know if something is wrong, or like if you're just wondering, like, Google it, find out, like, is what I'm doing okay, and then come back and then do whatever you need to do, because a lot of issues could have been easily solved if someone just took the time to, like, educate themselves first before going out and doing other things. So, like, Google is great. Following people who speak out about topics, or people like you who believe in different things even, is very helpful to, like, try and become more, not even socially aware, but like an okay person, like,
Yeah.
just in general. Because I know, like, one of my closest friends throughout high school was the complete opposite of me. Like, we believed entirely different things. Like, it's actually very crazy how we were friends, because we were on the complete opposite sides of the spectrum, but because we both understood that, like, just because I don't think the same thing that you think doesn't mean that you deserve any, like, less respect, or like you're any less of a person, or things of that nature. Like, it really is that simple. But without us having these conversations of, like, you can have that idea and still be an okay person, we're just not gonna do anything or move forward, at least.
Yeah, I understand. But along with that, I just want to also ask, like, outside of school, just living in these different places as well, did you experience any external racism outside of the school community?
Oh, so much, so much. It's actually crazy. So when I was in New York, because like, just walking on the street, you can't tell that I'm from South Africa. You just think that I'm a normal black person in New York, whatever. They'd say, like, really weird things, like, on the streets. If we're trying to get a cab, they'd be like, no, we're not going to Brooklyn. And we're like, we're going Upper East Side, baby. I don't know about you. But they'd just be, like, issues of that nature. Like, they'd follow us around the stores to make sure we're not stealing. And that still happens, like, even today. We get followed around stores. In Belgium, it was even worse, because it was a very heavily European country, and there's very, very few black people just in Belgium, and especially in Brussels, and they're all, like, kind of situated in one location. And so when you're outside of that area, you're pretty much the only black person in whatever vicinity you are in, which is very awkward and, like, uncomfortable, because you're always being followed, you're always being, like, looked at weirdly, things are said to you, and because they assume you don't understand French, then they, like, say mean things to you to your face, and you just have to, like, thug that out.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really disappointing, especially if you, like, think that international schools should be basically like your safe haven in a sense, because
Yeah,
they
no.
always uphold this idea of diversity and inclusivity, but, like, in reality it's not. So
Yeah.
if you could concisely put it, like, what would you say to a person that truly believes that, oh yeah, international schools are like, whatever utopia that you're supposed
Yeah, no. I think I'd tell them that it's definitely not a utopia, for reasons where, like, I can't even begin to count. In terms of, like, just the teacher population, if you can just start with, like, who teaches it, who works for the school, and see that, like, there's one black teacher, there's maybe two Asian teachers, there's maybe one biracial teacher, one teacher from America, and then the rest is all, like, British people. And you're like, how did we reach this conclusion? And then looking at the student population, where, because it's an international school that costs a lot, like, fees were like 37,000 euros, which is an ungodly amount of money, but most countries can't afford to take that money and put it into the school fees of a diplomatic child, let alone 2 or 3 or 4. So a lot of countries, a lot of people from different countries can't even afford to go to ISB, which already kills, like, the diversity, because if everyone in the EU sending their kids to ISB, like, there should be a lot more diversity. There should be way more African kids, way more Asian kids, way more South American kids, but there's 5. Like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely understand. Like, I currently, and also, like, being a person of color in the grade, like, There's a lot more Asian people than Black people, definitely. There's just, I don't think there's even 5 in my grade of like Black people. And there's at least 5 of Asian people. So that I think says in terms of like proportion.
Yeah, and imagine that's 5 per in a grade of what, 100?
A
Like,
little more, like 120 or
yeah,
something.
exactly. So imagine like 10 kids of color just vibing out in a sea of white.
Mm. Yeah, like you said it earlier, but it's not really about the racial diversity, but it's more about the like the nationality diversity, I guess they're like.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Because, well, not even nationality, because what happens in international schools, which like I realized, is that they'll boast about there being over 700 nationalities. There's over 100 nationalities in the grade. Like there's 59 nationalities in one grade, yada yada yada. And then like you'll count and you'll be like, yeah, no, he's German. There's French. There's the Swiss. There's the kids who live in the Vatican for a second. They were there too. Let's count them. And then like they're just counting a whole bunch of like European and white countries, and they'd be like, oh yeah, there's a kid from Africa. Where? But like there too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely get you. It's truly disappointing. But along with that, let's just come to like a nice little conclusion, unless people have like questions. If you have any questions, just put them in the question box. But how do you think, if you could say something to your previous schools or like even your previous teachers, what would you advise on, like, how should they move on overall?
I think overall, I think one thing is when students say something, believe them and do things about them. I don't think in general, like when victims say anything, you should probably believe them because they're probably not lying. And when that doesn't happen, it just breeds this kind of idea, like it normalizes the situation. Because if in like the 2nd grade, I had told my teacher, hey, like they keep touching my hair, like can you do something about it, or like can you explain to them why it's wrong? If that never happened, then obviously for the rest of my life I'm like, oh no, it's cool, like they're just allowed to do that, I guess. And that like then just creates more problems in the future. So I think when students say something, believe them and try to do everything in your power to address the issue in however way you seem fit. But not addressing it is worse than addressing it and having an unfair outcome, I think.
Yeah. No, I understand. Yeah. And also, why would anybody lie about being that is a very
like why would I create trauma?
Yeah, exactly. Like, why would you blame, or like, why would you pinpoint something that like, isn't there if it's not there?
Didn't
Like,
happen. Like, why would I create my own bullying? Like, that doesn't even make sense. But yeah.
Yeah. All right, perfect. It sounds like we don't have any other questions. But anyways, thank you so much, Amahle, for joining us. I really hope I'm saying your name. But yeah.
You're not, but it's fine.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's okay. Don't worry.
Perfect. And for our next interview, we'll be talking to Natalia about the impact of the hurricane in Honduras. So anyways, thank you so much for everybody that was listening today, and thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.